So let's all welcome Alyson as she comes to us today to talk about strategies to empower board members to get involved, impact, and influence others. Welcome, Alyson.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks for having me, and nice to meet you all. My intention today is to make this very interactive, and I would love to hear from all of you. So if you are comfortable having cameras on, mics on, and feel free to just kind of jump in any point. I have some ideas and offerings. I've worked in the nonprofit sector for almost 30 years now. I keep checking myself on that timeline. I've been the director of development twice for two organizations, really different organizations. And I've been consulting, working with organizations all over kind of Massachusetts for the last 5 years, coaching and consulting. So my hope is to bring you some ideas and some offerings that you can bring back to your organizations. And as always, I want to hear your voices and thoughts and questions. We want to make this time worthwhile for all of you who are able to join us today. So my first offering is the best way to get your board involved and get them engaged is, I think, to offer training. So training is a tool that I think I heard someone say once, it's the greatest gift you can give to your board is to offer training. And I will say this, I think, especially for fundraising, I have underestimated that I just assume people know how to do this, or that, you know, if you have a sales background, or if you're an outgoing person, or if you have a passion for the organization, that, you know, when we say bring in resources and revenue, that's something that folks will be able to just naturally do. And the longer I do this and the more boards and human beings that I work with, I just notice that a lot of people really need some tools to do this. And of course, right, we all need to learn from others. And I think it's actually a really fun way to get your board engaged too. So that's really what I wanted to kind of offer up to you today. And Lauren and I were connected through Andy Robinson. And this book, How to Train Your Board and Everyone Else to Raise Money, is in a really excellent workbook. And I'll hold mine up, although I know on the Zoom screen, you probably can't see, but mine is like dog-eared and post-it note and highlighted. And I've been using these exercises for years. And so what I wanted to kind of bring to you all today is one of these trainings. But I do want, and I'm happy to share this resource with you all. It's a great training guide that truly anyone can pick up and do on your own. You don't need a consultant really to do this, which is great for small shops. So first of all, and I would love to see whether you want to put in the chat or kind of use your virtual hand, but who has worked with the cycle of fundraising, has kind of seen this tool before? Let me know if this is a familiar resource. Okay, so Lauren, I see your hand. Thank you.
Yeah, I've seen it, but sorry, I'm off camera and have used it to middling effect.
Okay, good to hear. Yeah, I know. It's like, it's one of these things, and I feel like I've been playing around with it for years. And I do think it's a great baseline. Thanks for your thumbs up, Dave. I appreciate that. That it's a good baseline for board members. And I think as with every training, it's kind of like, how do you keep bringing it back or breaking it down into bite-sized pieces for them? Like, how do I keep using this? And I'm reminding myself, even as a consultant, sometimes I come in and do this great training, we break this down, and then we kind of move on to the next topic. So I'm trying to be really intentional with boards. And I do this actually with staff also. I love to get program staff, kind of when you bring lots of people in to do the cycle of fundraising training. So in this book from Andy Robinson, it does have a whole kind of training on how you can work the cycle of fundraising. But because of our limited time today, I thought we could dig into the identification of prospects piece a little deeper. And here's why. So let me show you this. So this is the other interesting pie chart, I think, that kind of works hand in hand with the cycle of fundraising. So for most board members I talk to, they say, oh, please don't make me ask for money, right? I'm passionate about this organization. I believe in the mission so deeply, but like, I'll do anything, just don't make me ask for money. To which I hand them this pie chart and say, great, that's totally fine. Everyone does not have to be comfortable asking for money, right? Like you all probably heard of the AAA board where we need everyone to be ambassadors, right? I personally think if you can't go out and talk about the organization with your friends at a dinner party or in the grocery line, and if you're not, a fan of your organization that you're sitting on the board for, it's probably not the right board for you. So that kind of baseline, every board member should be able to talk about it. But honestly, for a lot of people, the thought of asking your friends to, write a check or do that, something that they probably need some training on. I'm not going to say they never will do it, but sometimes it's further down the line. But there's lots of things that board members can do. And as this pie chart shows, that involve more deeply, I think is critically important for board members to do. And, we could do a whole training on that. And I'm sure, especially knowing a little bit about some of your organizations, there's lots of ways that you all tell the story and bring people closer to your mission through the educate, involve piece of the cycle of fundraising. And I think that the area where I really notice a lot of organizations struggling with is this identification piece. It's a little bit smaller, but I think oftentimes really what we want board members to do, in the olden days, we used to say, like, bring us your Rolodex, right? Like now it's like, who's your network? How do we expand the number of people in our database, the number of people in our events, the number of people in our networks. And that's really, I think, primarily what we really want boards to do, is identify people that we think, or they think rather, should be connected with the mission and that this mission will resonate with. So that identification of prospects, and honestly, I don't love the term prospects. I keep trying to come up with a better word that feels better to me. I mean, I think it's really identification of human beings in the world that we should get to know better, that our mission would resonate with. So I'm going to pause for a second before we get into this more deeply and see if anyone has any questions or comments about anything that I've offered so far.
I just want to say I've seen that this, cultivation cycle countless times. I have never seen the pie chart, and I love the pie chart so much more. There's so much more mission in there, so much more room for, why board members are interested in the organization in the first place. Like, just seeing it really spelled out that way, that like, this really isn't about the ask. The ask is such a tiny piece of the puzzle, and I've never seen it, and I love it.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback. I had a very similar reaction when I first saw that. I was like, oh, of course, right? And also, it's such an important tool for board members to see, not only for themselves, but for us as development people, right? Like what we spend so much of our time on is all those other parts of the cycle of fundraising. And honestly, I think it's also like the difference between development really and fundraising. Like most of us in the profession use those terms interchangeably, but I think it's really different. Fundraising can be so transactional, and development is really this cycle of all these different parts. And it truly is, I think, how you build relationships and, how all these other pieces of doing this work, and really getting people to want to invest in the mission, as opposed to just write a check to kind of, get people out of their way. So like, okay, I'll give you a check if you leave me alone. That's not what we're looking for, right? We're looking for people who really care about our organizations, want to be a part of them and invest in them. So that time allocation piece is super helpful. And I will credit Tina, I believe her name is Tina Sincata, and I'll share these slides with all of you so you have them. And this whole training is in the book for anybody who's interested in not that I'm promoting Andy's book. He's probably gonna, I sound like I'm selling it. I'm really not, but it is very helpful exercises for anybody who's interested. Great. Any other thoughts, feedback, questions before I dive in more deeply to this identification of prospects? Okay, great. Again, this is conversational. I want you, if you all have any questions, just jump in at any time at all and unmute. So who do you want to be introduced to? And I think this is really important. And I'm, kind of putting these very famous, very wealthy philanthropists up on the screen because, honestly, this is what I hear a lot. I don't know about you all, but every one of my clients wants to be introduced to Mackenzie Scott right now. Oftentimes people throw out, Oprah Winfrey or some other crazy wealthy person. And I'm always like, that's great. Do you know them? And we'll talk about kind of the tool I use to bring people kind of more down to reality. But I think organizationally and as development directors, development staff, we really should think about this before we would even start this training. Because oftentimes when you do brainstorming, and again, I'm speaking from my own experience, but I've heard this from a lot of people. We do brainstorming with boards, with volunteers. And honestly, the names or the ideas that people come up with aren't always what we're looking for. So if there are categories or groups or people that you're really interested in being introduced to, I think that's a great way to set up this training or this conversation with your board. Do some pre-work, I guess, as a staff before you open the door to this, like, who do we want to be introduced to? Okay, so the way that I work with boards, and again, staff, anybody who wants to kind of come up with some new people or people who've been engaged with the organization before, but think about identification of, let's call them prospects for today, is this tool called the ABCs. So I'm going to walk you through it first, and then we'll break it down and go into it a little bit more deeply. So A is your ability to give, which again, give what, right? Are you looking for $100 year-end appeal donation? Are you looking for $1,000, gift on a major gift maybe for your organization? Are you looking for a capital campaign gift? Giving the context of what you're looking for is very important. I often hear board members say, I just don't know anybody who can, make a gift. And I always think, well, what size gift are you thinking of? Are you talking about a $10,000 gift? Are you talking about a $500 gift? Oftentimes these first gifts, we're talking about $100 or, something to kind of bring the person closer in. So again, the pre-work for you all as an organization, as development staff, to really think about that and set the stage and the expectation for the board is super important. So that's your A. B is belief in the mission. And I'm going to kind of go into this more deeply of why I think this is by far the most important piece. If people don't believe in your mission, in my opinion, it doesn't really matter how much money they have or how connected they are to the organization. They may give you a transactional gift, but they need to believe in the mission if you're bringing in prospects, people that are, you're going to bring into that cycle, right? Involve more deeply, bring them in. The belief in the mission piece is critical, and it's kind of my non-negotiable. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we break this down. And then C is connection, and that's where reward comes in, right? How the test, Amy Eisenstein, who some of you may know, major gift guru, brilliant fundraiser, nationally known from New Jersey. So maybe some of you run in to her. I think Amy has a great kind of litmus test for this. She says, can you get them to email you back? Or can you get them to, pick up the phone if you call them? And that's a really good question for board members, because oftentimes I hear like, my brother's friend, sister lives next door to, it's kind of like, okay, so, and that's not like it's not off the table for me, but it's also like, all right, that's going to take more work to get to that person. Great. So can you email your brother or talk to your brother and find out if he's willing to make the introduction to whomever? So part of what we're trying to gauge is, does your board member have a connection to this human being that you want to bring in? And what's the likelihood that, we can get closer to them? So those are your ABCs: ability to give, belief in the mission, and connection. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And I am going to watch time as we're doing this, because this could take a lot of time to go into it deeply, but I want to pause again and just see if anyone has any questions about any of those areas and or feedback. Okay. So makes sense, right? You have to have the ability to give some type of donation. You have to have a belief in the mission, most importantly, and we need to have some connection. And again, this is where the board members come in, right? For most of us as staff, we all have our pools of people in our kind of, circles of influence in our lives, the people that we're with. And our board is a whole other group of people who has a whole other group of networks. And so that's where boards can really be super helpful on this. So what I do with organizations when I do this training is I create a 0 to 10 scale, actually, to use with the ABCs. And I do this typically with individual donors, but honestly, I've done it with a couple organizations recently, even for like foundations, to determine, and how do we prioritize, right? So let's say you do this with 10 board members. They all have a list of, 5 or 10 people, and you all are a one-person development shop, right? Like, how are you going to prioritize these names that your board's bringing you and decide, how to focus your time and attention? So what I do is this rating system of 0 to 10. And so for ability to give, it's a 0 to 3. And again, you have to quantify what's the gift, right? So is it a $1,000 gift or a $10,000 gift? What's that person's ability to give a gift in that range? So 0, they have absolutely no ability to give to that range, to 3, like, oh, absolutely, they can definitely do that. And when I work with clients, I really talk through, like, how do you know this? Like, do you know they gave to your organization before? Do you know they gave to a similar organization before? I'm not a huge fan of like wealth screening, just because I honestly don't think that for most of my clients it's necessary. I think especially when board members are bringing people in, we can kind of get a sense of whether or not this person can make, let's keep it as $1,000 gift. But I'm trying to get a sense of that, right? Where does this person fall on their ability to make a gift to our organization at the level? Then I go to belief in the mission. Again, I rate that the most heavily because I think it's the most important piece as we kind of prioritize prospects. And that's 0 to 4. And I give that a higher number than the other two. And we have a really big discussion usually organizationally on how do you determine that. So trying to think, like, I have an organization that I work with in Lowell that is, they do community gardens, school gardens, a lot of health outreach. So, we talk about, like, who are your kind of ideal donors? Who are the people who've given before? What are the things that they believe in? And obviously this is not objective at all. This is like kind of coming up with a profile of the types of people who believe in your mission. And again, if we don't really know anything about them, we don't know if they've ever given to any kind of organization like this. We don't know if they care about, healthy food and food sources or whatever, they might be a 0. But for most people, you have a 1 or a 2, you kind of have a sense that, oh yeah, they gave to this organization, or I know they love to cook or something like that. So I think this might be an organization they might be interested in. Whereas we have others that either they've given to similar organizations or they've given to your own organization. Like, oh yeah, they've been to our events and I know they really care about our mission. They just maybe haven't made a gift yet. So again, longer conversations, case by case basis, depends on the organization, but taking some time to really dig into that belief in the mission piece, I think is really important and a lot of the work to do. And then C, connection. Again, you know, if you're a board member, if you're staff, someone can get that email. That's a pretty easy one to gauge. And it also helps us to determine what's the work we need to do to get closer to this human being. So whether it's belief in the mission, we need to do some research and gather more information, or connection, you know, so-and-so knows them, I don't, what's the work to do? That's going to help us kind of get that rating system and have a score for each person kind of in the 1 to 10 range. And that helps us to prioritize. So again, if you're doing this with a board or, you know, even a few people, as you start to talk through each person using these categories, it really helps you a lot to see, okay, this is a person who we should be, you know, putting our time and energy into. And this is a person that may or may not be someone that we want to get to know better, but we need to prioritize. And again, I understand a lot of you are small shops. I've always been working with small shops. So that's a huge concern for me and my clients that, you know, if we have even, let's say 10 names, like how are we going to prioritize our time? So this ABC system really helps us to do that a lot. So I know I'm giving you, that was a lot of information on how to use the ABC system. And I'm curious to see if there's any questions or thoughts at this point. Oh. Denise, I see you're unmuted, but I don't hear you.
I'll weigh in.
Okay, great. Thanks, Amanda.
Better to talk about a little bit later, but I often find it challenging to even get certain board members to suggest names. And I find, having worked in a couple different organizations at this point with different cultures, I find that a lot to do with sort of your fundraising culture. How far along is your board? Is it an oversight board? Is it really sort of 2 steps away from being a volunteer board that now has professional staff? All of these things play into it a lot. And sort of also if they're in a, how would I say this, sort of shoulder rubbing type of community versus they like these are personal friendships and that's crossing the line. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. And I've had definitely very similar scenarios. I think that a couple of things. I think one of the things, depending on the stage of the organization, to your point, is to really think about like, what are we asking for? Because I think that starting and getting people, you know, sometimes it's like a ticket to an event or, you know, like something small, and also starting with like one person, right? Like everyone, we're just going to think of one person that we'll invite to this event. And maybe it's not even about money, you know, maybe it's about coming to tour your facility, right? Like take the money piece out of it, but, you know, how do we bring people closer to the mission? So I think like really breaking it down and being, first of all, aware of your organization and the expectations that are set, because I think that's often the case too, where to your point, this is a totally new concept for boards. Like I often get brought in, our board really needs to transition to more of a fundraising board. We've always been more of a working board. And one or two people think this is a great idea and everybody else is like, this isn't what I signed up for. So I think, also having some really direct conversations about that and getting people's buy-in. There's actually a great training too about, like all the associations of money, right? Like all the baggage that carries along, especially when you're talking about, like you said, asking your friends to do something, like what's standing in the way, what are the barriers? And also there's some great trainings about, like, most Americans on average give to between 8 and 10 organizations. So sometimes, like, just some of those data points get board members out of their own heads, just to kind of challenge some of those myths about, like, oh, well, I know they give to, their synagogue, or I know they give to their college, so they are not going to give to this organization. It's like, that's actually probably not true, right? Like, I'll probably give to several organizations, most likely. Or, well, that's interesting. Like, let's find out more about where they give. So anyway, these are like big conversations, I guess, is my point. And I do think there's a lot of oftentimes slowing down the process to really dig into some of the why with your board too, of like, tell me more about that. What's holding you back? How can we support you? Or what are you afraid of sometimes, as far as asking your friends or people in the community?
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I don't know. And I would welcome other people's thoughts and feedback on that question too, because I do think it's a really important one. And I think a lot of organizations definitely are trying to figure that piece out. Okay.
Denise has placed her comment in the chat section.
Oh, great. Perfect.
She's about determining the belief in the mission when most donations to date are transactional.
Oh, that's so good to know. So, and Denise, I would love to, maybe you can put in the chat, why do you say that they're transactional? What have you noticed? I don't know if that's coming up yet. Giving to a more memorial or a specific project. Okay, that's super helpful. And I appreciate that. I think, that is part of our analysis of a donor and why they're giving, right? So, and this goes to, it's actually kind of similar to the previous question. And like, if they're giving just to the person, right? Like, so your friend invites you to go to the event, or there's some kind of, a memorial gift, right? Where you're giving because this person passed away and your organization was named. How do we bring that person closer to the mission, right? Once they have made that first gift, knowing that it really wasn't about the belief in the mission, right? It's about the person who brought them in. And for some of those people, they may never, that might be it. It was really about, I care about my friend and this is the way I did it. Why I chose to give to your organization. But for others, it might be, oh, this is the first time they learned about your organization, and what can we do to educate and involve them and start, thinking more strategically, even calling to say, thank you so much for the gift. And, we'd love to invite you in so you can see the impact of your investment in our mission. I think, and again, small shops, it's really hard to do this, right? Like not a lot of us don't have the resources to do that follow up with every donor. But can you use the ABCs to get a sense when those gifts come in, or, have those conversations with your board members, if there is some kind of a more transactional gift, who of these people do you think we should try and invest some more time in. And I think that's really true for events too. Like a lot of times people have, invite a table of people to events or do like a fundraiser and they bring people in, but we don't necessarily do that debrief of like, so of these people you brought in, what did you notice? Who really was moved by the mission? Who do you think we should, kind of cultivate and bring closer? And what type of, what aspects of our organization resonated with them? I think that's a lot of times the work, so that post, whatever the transaction is, debrief piece really can help us to create a strategy. And again, not necessarily for everyone, but for a few people to bring closer. So I think that often is, I think, where board members appreciate that. I think sometimes they invite people. I know I've had this experience as a board member. I bring a lot of people in and then nothing happens after that event, right? There's like no follow-up with the people I brought in. And some of that's on me. Did I say, oh, so-and-so came and they were really moved and let's talk about what we should do to bring them closer moving forward. So I think some of it is, those expectations around what are we really asking you to do. I hope that's helpful. And I'm, again, welcome anyone else to jump in with thoughts or follow-up questions about that. Great. Thanks, Denise. Thanks for using the chat. I appreciate that. Any other questions? So, that kind of is my thought process on the identification of prospects. I will say that, it really, to do this well, or I should say when I've seen the most impact, is really, again, small. Like a lot of times I think the mistake that myself and other development directors have made is bring us 5 names or bring us 10 names, and everyone kind of freezes when you do that. I think if it's 1 name, that's a great place to start. And I think back to kind of the previous question, if it's ask for something small, like what do you all need in your organization and how do we break it down like that, and kind of take baby steps with those, but also make sure that, whatever the identification is and how we're bringing them closer, then we're really thinking about how do we work them through this whole cycle, including thank you from, the board member who brought them in, and then what's the next step? Really thinking about that strategy on a longer term basis so that it isn't transactional, it becomes more of a longer conversation and relationship building. And again, if you do try to do this whole training about the cycle of fundraising, you really do brainstorm, especially the educate, cultivate, involve piece, and ways like what would that look like to bring this person closer in, and it's not the same for everyone. I think the individualization of that is very powerful as well, when we really get to know people on a deeper level and connect them to the mission in a way that's appropriate for them. Any other questions, comments? I will say there's also a great think and recognize training of just getting people to think outside the box about how we thank people, who thanks, how do we get more voices involved in the thanking process. So really each of these areas, including the ask, which I've done some fun trainings with people just kind of playing out how they ask and how you can, ask in a way that feels appropriate and for people who do want to kind of work on that piece. But really we can do training for our boards on all of these areas, and it can be incredibly impactful and fun and energizing for your organizations. Any other questions, comments, anything development wise I can answer for anybody? Happy to do so.
I have another question.
Sure, thanks.
Okay, in a situation where you decide to proceed with holding a fundraiser with a board that's never received any formal training before, I find that it's critical to sort of strike a sweet spot in terms of the amount of time that you focus on it. It's like you want to ask them to set aside time, especially for this, but not so much that it's annoying them before they even get there.
That's a very good point. Yes.
I'm sure you've worked with many boards in this capacity, and I'm curious if you find any similarities or patterns that help strike a nice balance.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's real, you know, and I don't know how many of you all sit on boards yourself. Anybody sit on a board? I really recommend that. I see Denise's hand. It's super helpful to sit on boards. I actually make sure I'm always sitting on a board because I have to remember what it's like to be a board member, right? Because it's like, it's not your day job, right? I don't think about it all the time. And I think that's a really important question that Amanda, that you asked, because I think that sometimes, you know, I'll speak for myself again, as, you know, someone who works for an organization you care passionately about, and we do a lot of, you know, with this shoulding of what our board should be doing. And I think we have to be realistic, you know, about that. And I do think that's where, you know, little bite size, like this week, could you, you know, would you be able to do this? And like, how can I support you? And again, I know this is like a lot of work for small shops when you do fundraising, but, you know, let's take an event, you know, Amanda, what do you want them to do? What are you hoping your board does?
Similar to what you had just earlier suggested about productions, you know, I try to emphasize as much as possible that like they don't have to ask for money. All they have to do is give some thought to someone that is in alignment with our mission, that they have enough of a contact with to make an introduction, and I can essentially take it from there.
Okay. So, I mean, what I would do with that is really talk to, you know, people one-on-one, first of all. I think sometimes we try and do these in big groups and that's hard, but I mean, can you set up like a 15-minute check-in with a board member where you say, you know, I know you go to this synagogue, you're part of this community, you are in this book group, you know, I'm wondering, you know, so many people, you know, can you think of anyone that our mission resonates with as you're out talking? You know, just even before you ask them what you want, just think you know, I'm trying to brainstorm with each board member and think about who's in your network that you think our mission would resonate with. So to kind of break it down that way and get them thinking, I do think that people are very cautious about this topic, right? Like that's a trust piece. But I think the more that we break it down into bite-size, kind of smaller steps, the better. And I do think that board members need, you know, kind of some context, like, well, what do you want them to do? Or what are you looking for? Or, you know, why is that? So I think it's a lot of questions really to get a sense of that. And sometimes to say, you know, I understand, here's why this is so important. You know, I think that's the other thing, sometimes like setting some goals for your board to say, like, we're hoping everyone introduces one more person. Well, why is that important? You know, why do we need to bring more people in? Or what's our goal for this? I think oftentimes when, especially I do a lot of board interviews, board members often say like, I just feel bad. I know I'm not doing enough. There's like this guilt complex oftentimes that I hear. And I feel like what we need to do is give them some wins sometimes, like, to what you just said, like, I don't necessarily need them to write a check or do it. We're just trying to introduce more people. This is an amazing mission. We're doing great work. Not enough people know about us. So how do we kind of approach it that way?
Thank you.
What do you think? What resonates or what doesn't from that? Or what have you already tried?
I've tried a lot of what you said as far as down into smaller groups and, sort of small asks, providing, information a couple different ways during different times. But I think, where I'm at right now is sort of an acceptance of the fact that you're not going to get everyone to understand why this is important or ever bring this into their comfort zone. And that's okay. So I'm really just trying to focus efforts on those that do get it, but not burn them out.
Right. I hear you. I think that's really true, though. I think, I'm wondering about term limits. I don't know how everyone feels about term limits, but this is one reason why I'm a big fan of term limits, because I really do think we always need new energy in organizations, right? And oftentimes it's not everyone, but you get a few people who are really engaged. They're inviting everyone there, and they get to a point where they're like, I've invited everyone that I know, right, to get to know this organization. So like bringing new people in always, I think is really important. And I know, again, a lot of work, but it's true. Like, and I agree that it does not have to be every person on your board who takes this role, right? There's different people who have different gifts and talents that they bring to your organization. And not everyone is comfortable with that piece. So some of it is expectation setting on the front end, right? When we're recruiting board members. And again, I know I've made that mistake too, where you're like, oh, we're just so happy to have you. And, even if they're like, I don't really like fundraising, or I don't really, want to do this, we still kind of pull them in. And then, they get frustrated too. So I do think it's kind of some organizational pieces and expectation setting that's important as well.
Great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions for me?
Yeah, Alyson, I had a question for you.
Sure.
In terms of, I guess, how the board is structured or how committees are structured, is there any way that you could structure a development committee or just structure a board to be more conducive to better fundraising and encourage them to go through this cycle?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things come up for me. One is people do not have to be on your board to sit on committees. And I do a lot of board trainings where, I really encourage people to do that. Committees are a great place to bring people in, to get to know them before you invite them on your board. It's a great place for people who've been on the board in the past to stay engaged. So like utilizing those committees, I think, is a really good way to, bring more people into your organization, right? So, and thinking about identifying prospects, like sometimes it's how do we build our committees so they are full of not just board members. And I think, that goes back to what Amanda was saying about time too. Like, I know I'm sitting on a board now and they have me on like 3 or 4 committees. It's like crazy amounts of time. And, that is when you get burnt out. So can you do that a little bit better? And I think too, committees, especially now with so many groups meeting on Zoom, how do you introduce 10 minutes of, first, mission moments, right? Like, I think so many committees, we spend way too much time, honestly, doing like reporting out and not inspiring people, right? So I think that piece, every committee meeting should start with some, whether some story about a beautiful thing that's happened in your organization or a program staff who presents for a few minutes. I think that's important. and also, tight, concise meetings that are fun and productive and next steps, right? Like that you walk out and you're like, okay, we're identifying people. I know this is my homework and this is what's going to happen from it. I think a lot of times committees, and a lot of the committees that I've seen that are effective tend to be event committees because they are like short term and goal focused. We know what we have to do. So how do we kind of expand that from a development perspective? I think is a very powerful tool to utilize. And I think the training piece can be helpful with those too.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question.
Alyson, there's a question from Denise in the chat. It says, I serve on a board and members are asked to make phone calls. We find that the donors are very happy to hear from us without an ask.
I love that, Denise. Thank you for sharing that. It's so true. And I do think, people are, honestly, people don't use the phone anymore. I think having someone who actually calls and just says like, thank you, or gives you an update about the impact of the organization. And it's such a great thing for board members to do. And I will say the barrier that I see for some of my smaller organizations is just having that good information so that board members can make phone calls, both having, an appropriate phone number and also just having enough information about the donor. So this is why some boards like to thank people that they've brought into the organization. Other boards say, I'd rather call somebody who I don't know. So, doing that work with your board too, and setting them up. But I think it's really important. And I've heard from many donors, that they are impressed when boards are making those calls specifically. So, and again, a great part of your cycle of fundraising that has nothing to do with the ask, to get board members, engaged in this fundraising piece without having to do the asking. And the other thing I would just say, Denise, about that is, setting your board up to ask some good questions, like even the tell me why you got involved with our organization. I know you've been so generous. I'm curious, how did you get connected? Because sometimes staff doesn't even know that, and it's great to build your database and understand your donors better. So on the off chance that you actually get a live person, it's great to set them up with some good open-ended questions to, bring them closer to the mission as well.
Nancy has something here in the chat. Nancy, do you want me to read it, or are you able to?
Hi, I am here. And I have to say the conversation has gone in a great direction because many of us find ourselves hesitant until that beautiful moment happens and then we kind of bloom. But I know in my organization, there's a person that just has the gift of being able to tell a story, a true story that weaves people that are in the room right into the story. And it's a way that engages our group in a way that inspires. But there's a lot of history that goes with that and intel. But if we are able to do that instead of just always talking about the cause or zoning in on the ask, but telling a story about the last time we all did something successful together and how it happened. I think it's a way to acknowledge and thank and inspire for the next achievement. And I still haven't mastered it, but I'm in awe every time I experience it.
That's great. Storytelling is so important, and it's the heart part, right? It's like the head and the heart. Sometimes I think board members get nervous that oh, what if someone asks me a question I don't know to answer? Or it's like, tell your own story, right? About what you're passionate about or what brought you to the organization. It really is what connects human beings, right? And that's really what we're trying to do. So thank you for that, Nancy. I'd love to know more about that, like what you've noticed, and why it's so powerful. Great. Anything else before I let you all go?
Well, with that, thank you, Alyson, for joining us today and providing this presentation. It means a lot.
Good. I'm so glad. Thanks for inviting me, and good luck to all of you. I hope you are able to inspire your boards to bring lots of revenue and resources into your organizations.
Thank you so much.
Great.